Okay, the recording is on. Okay, a very good afternoon to our respected speaker, Dr. Nishi Pulugurtha. She is at present Associate Professor of English at Brahmananda Keshav Chandra College, Kolkata. I must share this that I was a student of Nishi ma'am at Ravindra Bharati. She used to take our classes. I have happened to hear a number of lectures delivered by her, and she is a very erudite scholar, a wonderful person, a very kind teacher, and a very active translator, academic, and social worker. Her publications have been published in the best publishing houses like Cambridge University Press, Routledge, Bloomsbury. She is also a renowned Shakespeare scholar, and we are really thankful to her for sharing her views on this rather uncommon text with us. And this is actually a challenge for us faculty members who did not happen to study Tamil literature in translation. And I thought that an experienced person, a scholar like her, would be the best person for this lecture. I am introducing you, ma'am, in English because this will be recorded, but I would humbly request you, keeping in mind our students' requirement, to kindly deliver the lecture in bilingual mode, as per your convenience. And without further ado, I will be handing over the platform to you. So she will be discussing Ilango Adigal's. Forgive me if I am pronouncing it incorrectly because I still am not sure whether it is Ilango Adigal or Ilango Adigal. Ilango Adigal's book of Banci for us, which has been prescribed for the Indian classical literature paper. So over to you, ma'am. And after the discussion, after ma'am's lecture, there will be a discussion. Until then, I'm switching off the microphone. If there is any technical difficulty, the students will switch on the microphone and inform.
Thank you so much to Devaditto for asking me to speak to you about Silapatikaram. I hope I'm audible enough. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I will try to use the bilingual mode in case I continue for a long time in English and you have any issues in understanding what I'm saying. I am more than willing to repeat whatever I have said. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. And I'll speak for a while, and after that is over, we'll have questions and queries if any of you might have any. So the south of India, as all of you know, has 4 major languages, Tamil, Kannada, Malayalam, and Telugu, which are spoken in 5 states as of now, because Telugu is spoken in 2 states, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. And all of these 4 classical languages have a very, very active literary tradition. And the Tamil literary tradition is almost 2 millennia old. And amra Tamil niyei bolbo predominantly, karon Silapatikaram একটা Tamil text. Ebong Indian literature is a very vast kind of an area. There are so many different languages, and ebong classical literature o kintu bibhinno bhashar moddhe ache, because we have in ancient India, we have Vedic literature with Puranas, we have Jain texts and so on, and also Buddhist texts. And the Jain and the Buddhist references will keep coming in when I talk about Silapatikaram. This particular text belongs to a literary period in Tamil, which is called Sangam literature. Ebong right at the beginning, let me point out je ek ekta jaygaye ek ekta banan pabe Silapatikaram ebong shopkota banani use kora jay. Some people use it Silapatikaram, some people Silapadikaram, Actually, the th in Tamil, যখন th লেখে ওটা দ pronounce হয়, সেজন্য Silapadikaram. You will also find some beginning with s, some beginning with c also. Google করলে দেখবে ওটাও পাচ্ছ, which is all right. Right. Similarly, age literature that produced Silapadikaram belongs to what is called the Sangam literature. এবং সাঙ্গামেরও অনেকগুলো different spellings আছে. It's pronounced spelled with a c as well. And what is Sangam literature? It is basically a group of ancient Tamil writings which were written in Tamil Nadu in a place called Maturai, which might be modern Madurai, from around the 4th to the 1st century. This Sangam literature is referred to as the early classical Tamil literature. And Sangam Kothatar mane hocche, this is an academy, a place where people gathered, where people wrote poetry. Ebong, like always, most of our literature is oral literature. So initially oral, ebong tarpore this was written down. One very interesting thing about this particular text and about Sangam literature is that it does not have anything to do with religion. The poetry of the Sangam period, the poems that were written at this point of time, they are basically on two main themes. One theme in Tamil is referred to as akam, which means love, which means emotion, which talks about what is happening within an individual. Right. So the poetry written in this period of Sangam literature could be poetry written about inner experiences, the emotional experiences, emotions, feelings about love, sentiment, which the poet wants to talk. And this kind of poetry was called the akam. This theme was referred to as akam. There was another theme যেটা আমরা সাঙ্গাম লিটারেচারে পাই, এবং that theme is about kings, about the various heroic activities of the kings, the various wars that the kings fought, এবং এই লিটারেচারটাকে বলা হয় পুরাম. So one kind of literature talks about what's happening within, emotion, sentiment, ittadi, and the other talks about what is happening, what the kings are doing, their activity, their work. And আমি এই দুটোর কথা এই কারণেই বলছি যে both these forms, akam and the puram, that is what is happening within an individual, sadness, melancholy, happiness, all the kind of emotions, এবং what is happening in the outside world with the king engaging in war, with the merchants engaging in trade, egulo shoptai kintu. So both the akam and the puram are a very important part of Silapadikaram. I don't know if you have read Indian classical literature and Natya Shastra. I assume you did have a paper or do have a paper on that. And the poems written during the Sangam era are very different. I mean, they might seem to be similar to the rasas, which Bharata speaks about in the Natya Shastra, jekhane nota rasa ache, and one rasa for each kind of bhava. কিন্তু এই যে আকাম এবং পুরামের কথাটা বললাম, এটা কিন্তু very different from the concept of rasa. This is very, very different. Different কেন? এই যে ইমোশন গুলো এক্সপ্রেস করা হয় সাঙ্গাম পোয়েট্রিতে, এই ইমোশন গুলো এক্সপ্রেস করা হয় predominantly by using nature, by talking about nature like the hills, the seashore, the barren land, the forest, say the lowland, kimba jolabhumi, right? These are what is used predominantly in these poems to describe emotions, right? So even when a poet is talking about what is happening within someone, even that is described through the use of kichu natural geography, like the hills, the sea, the beach, jolabhumi, jongol, morubhumi, etc. And in the Tamil language, this is called the tenai, right? যেমন ধরো, suppose a poet wants to talk about say the meeting of two lovers. So he will be using this, he will be using, say, hills to speak about the meeting of two lovers. কিংবা ধরো সে বোঝানোর চেষ্টা করছে কত সিক্রেট মিটিং কিছু হচ্ছে, কিংবা ধরো দুটো লাভারদের মধ্যে কিছু টেনশন আছে, সেটা বোঝানোর জন্য সে হয়তো সমুদ্রটাকে ইউজ করবে। কিংবা ধরো he is describing a deserted landscape, and one reason why he might use the deserted landscape is to speak about how frustrating a journey it is that is undertaken by these lovers. অনেক সময় জঙ্গল, elements of the forest are used to describe happiness, right? So what they do is they use these natural things to describe emotions that are happening within the characters. Eta kintu khub normal in this kind of literature. This literature, which flourished, as I said, between the 4th and the 1st century, this was rediscovered in the 19th century by several people who were interested in India's literary past, both Western এবং Indian scholars, who found out এই যে পুরানো পুঁথিগুলো সে তারা আবিষ্কার করলো, এবং what is most important is এগুলো ট্রান্সলেট করলো ইংরেজিতে এবং আরো অন্যান্য ভাষাতেও, এবং ইংরেজিতে ট্রান্সলেশন না হতো তাহলে হয়তো আমরাও পড়তে পারতাম না this particular text. So among all the kinds of literature written during this particular point of time, we are predominantly going to talk about Silapatikaram. রাইট, কিন্তু শিলাপতিকারামের পরেও কিন্তু আরেকটা এপিক লেখা হয়েছিল যেটা শিলাপতিকারামের সাথে প্রচুর রেফারেন্সেস কিংবা এনি ডিসকাশন অফ শিলাপতিকারামে ওটা এসে যাবে, and that is the name of the epic is Manimekalai. Right, and the character in Manimekalai is related to the characters in Silapatikaram, যে কারণেই দুটোকে একসাথেই বলা হয়। What is very interesting about these two particular epics, which come at the later Sangam period, এবং এই সময়টা অলরেডি বুদ্ধিজম এবং জৈনিজম তামিলনাড়ুতে কিন্তু ভালো মতো স্প্রেড আউট করতে শুরু করেছে। কেন আমি বুদ্ধিস্ট এবং জৈনের কথা বলছি? কারণ শিলাপতিকারামে কিন্তু প্রচুর জৈনিজমের ফিলসফি, জৈনিজমের আইডিয়ার কিন্তু প্রচুর রেফারেন্সেস আছে, এবং মানিমেকালাইতে প্রচন্ড মতো বুদ্ধিস্ট রেফারেন্সেস আছে, মানে বুদ্ধিস্ট ফিলসফি, বুদ্ধিস্ট ওয়ে অফ থট এন্ড সো অন। The very name Silapatikaram means it's a combination of two words, right? And these two words together give you the word Silambu. The word Silambu means anklet, jeta amra পায়ে পরি, নুপুর যেটা বলি আর কি। This is more thick than a nupur, right? And it's much more harder than a nupur. It's almost like a solid ornament which is worn. And the very word Adhikaram, the second part of this title, means a story about, right? So duto word ke ekshate korle Silapatikaram means a story about an anklet, right? Or therefore a story that centers around an anklet. So eje nupurta, the anklet that a woman wears as an ornament, is the center. That's what the entire story is named of, and you must already have some idea about the story. So you do know that the anklet plays a very, very important role in this particular work, Silapatikaram. It's a poem of 5,730 lines, besh lamba ekta poem. And this particular, as I said, this particular ornament, the anklet, is something which is most important in the story. Now, this story, this particular poem, is supposed to have been written by Ilango Adikal, and you can call him Adigal, Atikal, both are all right, because TH, যেটা লেখা হয়েছে এটা দ প্রনাউন্স করা হয় তামিলে। What is very interesting, and this is very common to older literature, is that this particular story that the that Silapatikaram talks about, এটা কিন্তু খুব পুরনো একটা গল্প, যেটা কিন্তু সাধারণভাবে ওই সময়ের মানুষরা কিন্তু জানতো। এই যে গল্প about a young merchant called Kovalan who marries a very good woman called Kannagi. She's called Kannagi, Kannaki, দুটোই ঠিক আছে. How he falls in love with a courtesan called Madhavi, and তারপরে তার কি হচ্ছে এবং সে চলে আসছে তার জায়গা থেকে টু মাথুরায়, এবং he is unjustly executed while trying to sell his wife's anklet. And what happens thereafter, what Kannagi does and how she tries to to clear up her husband's name, and ultimately what happens to her. এই যে গল্পটা, এই মূল গল্পটা কিন্তু খুব পুরনো একটা গল্প, which most people in Tamil Nadu, in the Tamil world at that point of time knew. তো গল্পটা খুব একটা নতুন কিছু না, most people knew the story. What is important is the way the story is presented. আর এটা আমরা কিন্তু প্রচুর টেক্সটের মধ্যে দেখে থাকি, যেখানে somebody is using জানা একটা টেক্সট, জানা একটা গল্পকে ইউজ করছে এবং তাকে অন্যরকম ভাবে প্রেজেন্ট করছে। Silapatikaram, like any other epic, talks a lot about the Tamil culture, about the religions practiced, about details of towns and cities. এবং এই সময় যে সাংঘাতিক মতো ট্রেড এন্ড কমার্সের চল ছিল, এবং ট্রেড এন্ড কমার্স শুধু কাছাকাছি রাজ্যের সাথে নয়, বাট ট্রেড এন্ড কমার্স উইথ দ্য গ্রিকস, উইথ দ্য আরবস, মানে অত দূর থেকেও লোক আসছে ট্রেড এন্ড কমার্স করার জন্য। দ্যাট ইজ সামথিং উইচ দ্য পোয়েম টেলস আস অ্যাজ ওয়েল। এবং তাছাড়া ধরো ডান্স, মিউজিক, so it tells us a lot about the time, like any epic does, it tells us a lot about that particular society, that particular language, that particular time and culture in which it is written. Right. Now, Buddhism spread widely throughout India, and আমরা এটা জানি কারণ হচ্ছে বুদ্ধিস্ট অনেকগুলো অশোকার যে ইডিক্ট গুলো আছে, অশোকার যে লেখাগুলো, সেগুলো আমরা বিভিন্ন জায়গায় পাই। এবং when we read Silapatikaram এবং অন্য যে এপিকটার কথা বললাম Manimekalai, সেটাতে কিন্তু বুঝতে পারি যে জেনিজম কিন্তু খুব ওয়াইড স্প্রেড ছিল at this point of time, right? And এই যে বুদ্ধিজম এবং জেনিজম, these were তখনকার দিনের তিনটে মেজর যে ডাইনাস্টি ছিল যারা রুল করছিল ইন দ্য সাউথ অফ ইন্ডিয়া, তারা ছিল হচ্ছে চোলা, পান্ডিয়া আর চেরা। এবং এই তিনটে ডাইনাস্টি, তিনজনই খুব পাওয়ারফুল, এবং তিনটে ডাইনাস্টিতেই কিন্তু বুদ্ধিজম এবং জেনিজমকে কিন্তু তারা অনেকটাই পেট্রোনেজ করতো, right? So if there was someone who was practicing Jainism or Buddhism in these courts, they were allowed to practice it freely, right? The Pallava kings, their court was in the city of Kanchipuram, right? Most people know Kanchipuram today because that is the place where you get the sari, the Kanjivaram sari, right? So that is Kanchipuram. So Kanchipuram was a major, that was where the Pallava dynasty was located. The Pandya dynasty is its center is in Madurai. Ebong ajgeo kintu Madurai is a very big city known for its very, very important temple and the temple architecture. And the other dynasty was the Chera dynasty, and all of these were very, very important. এবং এই যে তিনটে dynasty, not only were they very, very strong, but they were also very active in the trade and commerce section, right? As I told you, prochur trade relations with the Greeks, with the Arabs, apart from the local states and local places chilo. So they had lots of contact with Maharashtra, with places in Andhra Pradesh. একটা জিনিস মনে রাখবে, এখন যেটাকে আমরা আন্ধ্রা বলি কিংবা এখন যেটাকে আমরা তামিলনাড়ু বলি, এই সময় কিন্তু সেটা ছিল না, right? These modern states of Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, এটা কিন্তু যে সময়ের কথা বলছি সেই সময় কিন্তু এই স্টেট গুলো ছিল না। আমি যখন তামিল বলছি তখন কিন্তু আমি একটা বড় অংশকে বলছি, কোনো স্পেসিফিক স্টেটকে বলছি না, কারণ স্টেটটা আসে অনেক পরে, ইন্ডিপেন্ডেন্সের পরে স্টেটের কনসেপ্ট আসে, তার আগে কিন্তু নয়। আমি যখন ভাষার কথা বলছি তখন আই এম টকিং অ্যাবাউট আ ল্যান্ড ইন উইচ দিস ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ ইজ স্পোকেন. Silapatikaram is a story, as I said, about people, about it's a folk story. যেটা সবাই খুব জানতো. It's a very, very common story. And we also have within this particular text the presence of a Jain Sadhavi. যে ক্যারেক্টারগুলো আছে তার মধ্যে কিন্তু একটি important character is a Jain Sadhavi. I'll see if I can share my presentation. আশা করি দেখতে পাচ্ছ, যে হাত দিয়ে ইশারা করলেই বুঝতে পারবো। Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, so I do have a list of characters out here. I'll just see if I can show it to you. And among the list of characters that we have in this particular text, one of the characters in this text is actually a Jain nun. এই যে ক্যারেক্টারটা কাবিন্তি আদিগাল, she is a Jain nun. So the presence of the Jain nun is another very important indicator to us. এটা আমাদের খুব ভালো মতোই জানায় যে জেনিজমটা কত ইম্পর্টেন্ট ছিল, right? So within the poem you have, within the story of the poem you have this Jain Sadhvi, the Jain nun, who is a religious person in this particular story. এবং throughout the story there are several Jain themes in this text. মানে পুরোটাই জেনিজম নয়, কিন্তু কিছুটা জেনিজমের কিছু কিছু ইনফ্লুয়েন্সেস আছে, right? So this is something that one needs to notice when one is reading the poem. এবং আমি যেটা বললাম, the presence of Jainism in the south of India, এবং এখনো তোমরা যদি সাউথ ইন্ডিয়াতে, তামিলনাড়ু বা কর্ণাটকাতে অনেক রক কাট কেভ টেম্পলস আছে, এবং সেগুলো which were built around the 1st century, এবং এই many of these rock cut temples have Jain temples as well. So ধরো যেমন ফর ইনস্টেন্স ইন কর্ণাটকা there is this place called বাদামি, যেখানে অনেকগুলো রক কাট টেম্পলস আছে, এবং তার মধ্যে কিন্তু একটা one of them is devoted to the Jain Tirthankaras, and that shows us very clearly how important Jainism was here as well. The name of the author, the person who wrote this particular text, is Ilango Adigal, and there is a lot of criticism, a lot of controversy যে আদৌ উনি লিখেছেন কিনা, কিংবা উনি কে ছিলেন এক্স্যাক্টলি সেটাও খুব একটা ক্লিয়ার নয়। কিন্তু মোটামুটি যেটাতে লোকে এগ্রি করে সেটা হচ্ছে যে ইলাঙ্গো আদিগাল, he was a poet, he was possibly a Jain monk, and he was also a Chera prince. আমি যেটা বললাম, তিনটে important dynasty at this point of time: the Cholas, the Pandyas, and the Cheras. The very word Adigal actually refers to a Jain saint, right? And Ilango Adigal is supposed to be one of the greatest poets belonging to the Chera period. In the poem itself, there is a prologue which is called the Patikam, and in this particular prologue, he identifies himself, Ilango identifies himself as the brother of the Chera monarch Sengutuvan. He is generally considered to be the younger son of the Chera king, and the story goes that a priest had said that the younger son would replace the father, and when Ilango got to know of it, he decided to give up his royal status, and he begins to write. He wrote several other poems, among which is the other epic which I spoke about, Mani Mekalai, which is the story of Mani Mekalai, who is the daughter of Kovalan. Kovalan is the man that we come across in Silapatikaram. And Kovalan has an affair with Madhavi, who is a courtesan. Ebong ei affair shutre a daughter is born to Kovalan, jeta Kovalan jane na arki. But this girl is called Mani Mekalai, and she is the central character of Adigal's other epic called Mani Mekalai. This particular epic is set in the city, in two cities. Right, the two cities are, if you can see the map, I think the setting of the epic are the two cities of Puhar and Kanchi. Kanchi is Kanchipuram. এখনো সেটা আছে, মাদ্রাসের খুব খুব কাছে এই জায়গাটাতে কাঞ্চি। right? And the other is Puhar, যেটাকে actually Pumpuhar bolto, and Pumpuhar is here, where I'm pointing my cursor. Kintu Pumpuhar now is a lost city, right? Pumpuhar was a very, very important city. এবং it was a very, very important port. Port important বুঝতেই পারছো, কারণ ট্রেড এবং কমার্সের জন্য সমুদ্রের কাছে থাকলে কিন্তু অনেক সুবিধা হতো. And that's the reason why this particular city, Pumpuar out here, became a very, very major city. এবং now it's almost a lost city, কিছুই নেই practically. So here is Kanchipuram, here is Pumpuhar, এবং আরেকটু নিচে দেখো, here is Madurai. And Madurai also is, it's not near the coast, but it is on the bank of the river Vaigai. So accessibility using the river, সেটা কিন্তু এখানে খুব ক্লিয়ার আছে. আরেকটা হচ্ছে কবিতাটার মধ্যে দেখবে কাবেরী রিভারের কথা প্রচুর লেখা আছে, এবং এই যে পুম্পুহার কিন্তু is on the almost on the mouth of the river Kaveri, where it enters into the Bay of Bengal. So the river forms a very important part of the story as well. And rivers are always important, have always been important, কেন যেখানেই সভ্যতা গড়ে উঠেছে তার নদীর পাশেই কিন্তু গড়ে উঠেছে. The setting of this particular story, Silapatikaram, are these two cities of Puhar. Pumpuhar ke Puhar bolto, and the other is Kanchi, যেটা আমরা এখনো কাঞ্চি কিংবা কাঞ্চিপুরম বলি. এবং what is interesting is that এই দুটো শহর পুহার এবং কাঞ্চির উল্লেখ অনেকগুলো গ্রিক টেক্সটে পর্যন্ত আছে, right? And this tells us that there was a very important and flourishing trade between the Greeks and these two Tamil kingdoms at this point of time. এবং this particular work, Silapadikaram, is set in these two very, very important towns. And in these two towns, we have, as I said earlier as well, we have Jain and Buddhist influence here as well. So this particular story this particular epic takes the story of Kovalan and Kannagi, which I told you is a story which is based on folk elements. তার মানে সাধারণ মানুষ কিন্তু এই গল্পটা জানতো, right? So they take these elements and he develops it into a story. এবং কিছু কিছু এখানে জেন কিছু কিছু concept he adds. So the central characters of Silapadikaram are Kannagi. Some text also refer to her as Kannaki, K-I-O add kore, which is all right. She is the central character of this particular epic. Kovalan is her husband, who is the son of a wealthy, kind merchant based in Pumpuhar. There is Madhavi, who is a young courtesan, who is described as belonging to the family of Urboshi. মনে আছে উর্বশী, ইন্দ্রর কোটে যে উর্বশী, যে apsara যেটা, তার নাকি descendant. তাছাড়া we have the Jain nun, Kavanti Adhikal. There is the Pandya queen, there is the Pandya king, and so on. The story begins in the city of Pumpuhar or Puhar, which is a flourishing city, the capital of the Chola kingdom. The Cholas were a very, very important dynasty in the south of India. এবং তারা কিন্তু very, very prosperous, এবং প্রচুর temples, প্রচুর cities built করেছিল. The poem begins with the marriage of Kovalang and Kannagi, who belong to two very, very important families in the area. And after they marry, they live together very happily for some years. Kovalan begins to earn, and their life seems to be moving all right. In the town of Puhar, which is the other city where this story is set, is a beautiful courtesan named Madhavi, who is a very talented dancer. And because she's a talented dancer, because she's known, her সবাই জানে তার সম্বন্ধে, so she is asked to come and perform in the court of the Chola king as well. When she comes here, that is when Kovalan meets her, and he completely falls in love with her, abandons his wife Kannagi, and begins to live with Madhavi. When this happens, Kannagi, who is a very faithful wife, She is completely saddened by it. And, she's always crying and mourning throughout. Kovalan forgets about his wife. He is completely taken in by Madhavi. Right. So that is the main element of the story that happens. As life moves on, as Kannagi's very sad life goes on, there is a celebration of spring in the city, and everybody goes to the seashore, and Kovalam and Madhavi also go to the seashore. And there is one episode in the poem where Kovalan is given a lute, and Madhavi asks her to play the musical instrument, and Kovalam begins to sing a number of songs about a woman, a lonely woman who has lost her lover. And Madhavi thinks that maybe Kovalan is not interested in her anymore, is singing about another woman. And she gets angry with him. And Kovalan also begins to feel that Madhavi no longer cares for him, and he decides to leave her. When he goes away, Madhavi is heartbroken. She writes a letter to him asking him to come back. He refuses to do so. And he feels that Madhavi is not someone with whom he can spend his whole life. So he gives up his relationship with Madhavi. আর এর মধ্যে কিন্তু যা টাকা পয়সা ছিল সব কিন্তু সে হারিয়ে ফেলেছে। All business, everything he has stopped, and all the money that he has spent all the money. So basically now he's a very, very poor man. And he decides to come back to Kannagi, his very, very faithful wife. Kannagi, on the other hand, is, as I said, a very dutiful, faithful wife, and she is very worried about her husband and what he's doing, because she understands that he's wasting all the money. He is not involved in business anymore. So when she sees that he comes back, she is very, very happy. Right, in spite of the fact that Kovalan তাকে ছেড়ে চলে গেছিল অনেকটা সময়ের জন্য, yet when Kovalan comes back and Kovalan apologizes and tells her that he's going to remain with her, she agrees to that. She accepts him completely, and both of them decide to leave the city of Puhar, and now they go to the city of Madurai, which most probably is modern Madurai, the capital of the Pandya kingdom. They go there with the hope যে নতুন করে আবার জীবন শুরু করবে। এইবারে নতুন করে সবকিছু শুরু করার জন্য টাকা পয়সা দরকার, এবং কোভালানের কাছে কিছু নেই। At that point of time, Kannagi decides to help him. She removes her anklet, which she was wearing. আগেকার দিনেতে প্রচুর সোনা যেগুলো পরা হতো, গড়া হতো, এই সোনা was used, as a kind of help in times of financial crisis. That was one of the reasons why people bought a lot of gold or a lot of silver, because this is one way in which people could accumulate money. So she gives this anklet to Kannagi, to Kovalan, and tells him that, sell the anklet, এবং তাতে যা পয়সা আসবে সেটা দিয়ে তারা business শুরু করবে. Right. So when they leave, as they are leaving Madurai, leaving Puhar and moving to Madurai, on the way they meet this Jain nun called Kavunti Adigal, and they cross the boundary between the Chola and the Pandya kingdoms, and ultimately they come to the bank of the river Vaigai, যেটা আমি বললাম, Madurai is on the bank of this river Vaigai. এখন অবশ্য Vaigai is it's almost like a nala. Right. And one Indian poet, A.K. Ramanujan, has actually written a poem on the Vaigai as well. But at the time that we are talking about, the Vaigai was a nice big river. They come here, and when they come to Madurai, they decide that এখানে তারা থাকবে আর কি। ঠিক আছে, এবারে এখানে it is here in Madurai that Kovalan finds out that courtesan with whom he had been living for such a long time has given birth to a daughter who is called Mani Mekalai. Kovalan has very strange kind of dreams here when he's living in Madurai, and one of the dreams, suggests that something bad is going to happen to him. And both of them begin to live here in Madurai. And at one point of time, they are, Kovalan has to go into the city because he has to, sell the anklet because they want money. Throughout the epic, Kannagi is portrayed as a very dutiful, very faithful woman. Right, in spite of the fact যে কোভালান এত কিছু করেছে, তার সাথে এত রকম অন্যায় অবিচার করেছে, in spite of it all, কোভালান কান্নাগি কিন্তু সেগুলো কিন্তু মাথায় রাখেনি. On the other hand, she has been very, very sad all throughout. But when she realizes that he has come back, she does everything that she can to make to begin their life all over again. So এই অ্যাঙ্কলেটটাকে নিয়ে মাদুরাই শহরে কোভালান goes to sell it off. কার কাছে বিক্রি করবে? শ্যাকরার কাছে বিক্রি করবে. So he goes to the goldsmith and he decides to sell this anklet. এবার the goldsmith looks at the anklet, takes it from him, asks him to wait, and then goes off to the palace of the Pandya king and tells the king that, look what I found. This is the anklet. This is a gold anklet which I found. Now, এই যে পান্ডিয়া কিং এর যে কুইন, দ্য পান্ডিয়া কুইন, তার একটা অ্যাঙ্কলেট কিন্তু হারিয়ে গেছে. ইটস বিন স্টোলেন, চুরি হয়ে গেছে অ্যাকচুয়ালি. এবং অ্যাকচুয়ালি এই যে শ্যাকরা, হি ইজ দ্য ওয়ান হু হ্যাজ স্টোলেন দ্য কুইনস অ্যাঙ্কলেট. কিন্তু এখন যখন একদম ওরকমই একটা অ্যাঙ্কলেট যখন সে পেল, তার কাছে এটা একটা ভালো, it is a good thing for him because he can use this to put the blame on Kovalan. So he goes and tells the king, "Dekhun, I found this anklet, and this man has stolen the anklet." Ebong king and queen tara kintu poroshporer sathe kotha barta bolche na because the queen is very, very upset, and the king is very happy je chorke khuje pawa geche. এবং কোন রকম কোন ট্রায়াল নেই, কোন জাস্টিস নেই, কোন প্রশ্ন নেই, তারা কিন্তু ধরেই নিল যেহেতু অ্যাঙ্কলেটটা খুঁজে পেয়েছি এবং অ্যাঙ্কলেটটা কোভালানের কাছে ছিল, সেই জন্য রাজা আদেশ দিল যে কোভালানকে ধরে নিয়ে আসো এবং কোভালানকে এক্সিকিউট করে দাও. রাইট, সো কোভালান ইজ কিল্ড and the goldsmith is very happy যে সে বেঁচে গেল, and he goes and gives this anklet to the king. Eibare, for a long time, when Kovalan does not come back, Kannagi is very much worried about him, and she finds out from a herdswoman whose name is Matari that this is what has happened to Kovalan, that Kovalan has been killed because he's been thought to be a thief. He has stolen the Pandyan queen's anklet. When Kannagi gets to know about this, she's absolutely violent. She is in great rage, and this is how the pictures of Kannagi are presented in popular culture. Right, she's absolutely angry at what has happened to her husband, and she decides to go to the court to find out what has actually happened and why her husband has been killed. She is so very upset. So she first goes to the goldsmith's shop, and there she finds the dead body of her husband. And first, she's very sad, she's upset. And after that, you see her anger. She's a fierce woman, absolutely waiting to take revenge because she wants to fight for justice. So she goes into the court of the Pandyan king and demands justice from him. Right, and তাকে তখন বলা হয়েছে যে তোমার হাজবেন্ড তো চুরি করেছে অ্যাঙ্কলেট, এইবারে তার কাছে তো অন্য অ্যাঙ্কলেটটা আছে, দুটো পায়ে তো পড়ে. সো হোয়াট শি ডাজ ইজ শি ব্রেকস ওপেন দিস অ্যাঙ্কলেট, এবং অ্যাঙ্কলেটটা যখন সে ভাঙে ভেতরে সব জেমস ছিল. রাইট, ভেরি ভেরি কস্টলি স্টোনস আর দেয়ার, and this proves that Kovalan is innocent কারণ কুইনের অ্যাঙ্কলেটের ভেতরে কিন্তু মুক্তো আছে, not these precious stones. When the king finds it out, he is absolutely very, very remorseful at what he has done. Because of him, an innocent man has died. And the king dies out of remorse. The queen also dies because of this. But Kannagi is angry. And in her anger, she comes out of the palace and she curses the entire city. the city of Madurai, which has brought so much of grief to her. The anger within her almost transforms her into a superhuman, gives her superhuman power. Ultimately, of course, Kannagi becomes a goddess, right? The story goes that she tears off her left breast and she throws it at the city, cursing it. And the moment her left breast falls on the city bursts into flames. In a very beautiful passage here in the epic, as I said, after all of this, Kannagi becomes a goddess. And Kannagi appears before explaining the Jain laws of karma, meaning whatever you do, you are going to reap the fruits of that. Right. So Kannagi becomes a goddess almost. She becomes a goddess. Right. So this karmic cycle, that whatever you do, one has to suffer for it. So she's explained that Kovalan died because his karma was such, because of the various deeds that he did. In a similar way, this is what has happened to her husband. He dies, he had to suffer in this birth because of the deeds that he did in the previous birth, right? And the goddess informs Kannagi that she will soon rejoin her husband within 14 days. Kannagi leaves Madurai, she goes to the Chera kingdom, and she then ascends the chariot that the god Indra sends for her. And that is how this human character of Kannagi transforms to that of a goddess. She becomes a goddess, right? And the Chera queen asks for a temple to be built for her to be worshipped as a goddess. So here is an ordinary woman who becomes a goddess, right? And people worship her, right? So we also here in the poem find out that the Jain monk Kavunti and the herdswoman Matari, even they have ended their lives as they failed to protect Kannagi, right? And once Kannagi becomes a goddess, she is worshipped in the temple. And this particular temple, after she becomes a goddess, she's called Pattani. And all the other kings slowly begin to worship her as the embodiment of virtuosity, as the embodiment of chastity, right? And this worship of this goddess Pattani, who is actually Kannagi, happens not just in India, not just in the Chola, Chera and the Pandya kingdom, but also in faraway Sri Lanka. Like Silapadikaram, as I told you, in the other epic Mani Mekalai, the central character Mani Mekalai is Kovalan's daughter. Kovalan and Madhavi, the courtesan, have a daughter, and Mani Mekalai is a sequel to Silapadikaram. What is very interesting about both the epics is that they have women characters, women protagonists at the center of the poem. So the women, the central character, the central figure in Silapadikaram is Kannagi, right? And Kannagi becomes the voice of injustice. She's speaking against injustice that has happened, where her innocent husband is killed without a fair trial. So in this very ancient period, here you have a woman protagonist talking about the need for justice. Also, see, Kannagi is a very ordinary kind of woman. She's not a princess or not very educated, nothing. She is a woman who is mostly at home, who even when her husband leaves her and goes off, she is very, very sad, but she remains there. When he comes back, she accepts him. Right. So Kannagi becomes an example, an embodiment of a woman who has been injured on various levels. She changes from being an ideal daughter-in-law to become an ideal wife. And later on, she becomes almost a symbolic figure fighting for justice again. And for whom is she fighting? She's fighting for justice for her husband, this very same husband who left her and went away. So as a result of which, she becomes a kind of an avenging goddess figure, a very, very powerful figure, and later is canonized as a very benevolent, very protective goddess. One of the reasons why there are women at the center of these two epics, Silapadikaram and Manimekhalai, I think is that maybe it's because of the influence of Buddhism and Jainism on this epic tradition in Tamil Nadu. Right. The fact that men and women were allowed to have their identities, were allowed to function equally in society is something that is seen in Jainism and Buddhism. Apart from Jainism and Buddhism, we also see the local context where Kannagi ultimately becomes the goddess Pattani. This change where this angry, first she is the very ordinary woman, later becomes an embodiment of justice, an avenging woman, and then later becomes a goddess. This, I think, is in keeping in the poet writes all of this, keeping in mind the local context. Right. Kannagi becomes a symbol of an angry woman, of a vengeful woman, a woman who is out to take revenge, a woman who wants justice. And she becomes a symbolic voice, and her demand for justice is like the universal demand.
Hello, madam.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, the thing is, we just lost power for about 10 minutes. I immediately called you, but probably your phone was silent.
Yes,
So
yes, it is.
we'll just request you to please repeat the last few points that you made. তোমরা কত নম্বর স্লাইড ছিল যখন পাওয়ার এটাতেই ছিল? Okay, what they're saying is that you are just discussing this slide only. So probably if you could just repeat discussion on this slide, that will do just fine.
Right. Yeah.
Very sorry for
That's
the
okay. My phone is silent actually. I missed your.
Okay.
Right. So আমি যেটা বলছিলাম সেটা প্রিডমিনেন্টলি যেটা হয়তো মিস করে গেছো সেটা হচ্ছে যে after the husband dies, she becomes very angry, right? And she's angry because এখানে কোনো জাস্টিস ডেলিভার হলো না, কেউ কোনো প্রশ্ন করলো না, কিছুই না, জাস্ট ওর হাজবেন্ডকে ধরে মেরে ফেলা হলো, right? And এই যে anger at the fact that an innocent man has been killed, this leads her to come to the court. She tears her left breast and she throws her left breast at the city, cursing the city. And the moment her left breast falls on the ground, the city completely bursts into flames. She finds out from the Buddhist monk, from the Jain monk, that there's something called karma. And Kovalan has been paying for the karma for the deeds that he did in his earlier life. He had to suffer for that in this life, right? And she's also consoled and told that she will rejoin her husband in 14 days. What is very interesting is that এই যে গল্পটা, এই গল্পটার শেষে কিন্তু কান্নাগি becomes a goddess. Right, she leaves the city of Madurai, she comes to the Chera kingdom, and here in the Chera kingdom, the god Indra sends a chariot for her, and this is where Kannagi transforms from a woman, from a vengeful woman, from a woman seeking justice, into a goddess, right? And the Chera king decides to build a temple dedicated to her. And এই যে টেম্পলের মধ্যে যে আইডলটা বানায়, মূর্তিটা বানাবে, সেই মূর্তির জন্য পাথরটা হিমালয় থেকে সে নিয়ে আসে, and almost everyone begins to pray to this goddess, right? So this entire process where this woman, who is a very ordinary kind of woman, a woman who is spurned, যার হাজবেন্ড তাকে ত্যাগ করে চলে গেছে, a woman who later on begins to fight for justice, she becomes a symbol of virtuosity, she becomes a symbol of chastity. And this worship of this goddess, she's now no longer called Kannagi, but she is the goddess Pattani. And there's a big temple built by the Chera king dedicated to her. And in this temple, the god Pattani is worshipped as an embodiment of virtuosity and chastity. Not only is she worshipped by the Pandyas, Cheras, and Cholas, but she's also worshipped even in Sri Lanka, which is pretty far off. What is very interesting about these two epics, Silapadikaram and Manimekalai continues the story that we see out here, because Manimekalai, the central character, তার নাম Manimekalai, এবং Manimekalai is the daughter of Kovalan and Madhavi, the courtesan. What is very interesting in these two particular epics is that both of them, তাদের central character কিন্তু women. Their central characters are women, এবং women who speak about injustice. Right. So যে সময়টাই এপিক গুলো লেখা হয়েছে, these women are the voice. These women were speaking against what is wrong in society. এবং এটা মনে রাখবে, Kannagi is a very ordinary woman. Right. She is just the wife of Kovalan. এবং কোভালান যখন তাকে ছেড়ে যায়, সে কিন্তু চুপচাপই থাকে, কান্নাকাটি করে ঠিকই, কিন্তু তার বেশি আর কিছু করে না। এবং যখন কোভালান ফিরে আসে, she accepts Kovalan. In spite of all of this, যখন কোভালানের বিরুদ্ধে এরকম একটা ইনজাস্টিস হয়, she raises her voice against it, and she becomes a symbol of injured woman, almost an universal kind of a figure she becomes. She begins as a daughter-in-law, becomes a very ideal, dutiful wife, এবং later on she becomes a symbolic figure, a figure who is willing to fight against any kind of injustice, and ultimately she becomes a goddess, a very benevolent, very protective kind of a goddess. She becomes goddess Pattani. One of the reasons why এই দুটো এপিকে women ক্যারেক্টাররা এত ইম্পর্টেন্ট, তার কারণ হয়তো বুদ্ধিজম এন্ড জৈনিজমের জন্য। কারণ বুদ্ধিজম এবং জৈনিজমে কিন্তু women were almost given a kind of an equal role and function with reference to their gender and their identity. This transformation of Kannagi into Pattani, into a goddess, I think is kept doing in mind the local context. So what's happening is গল্পটাকে নিয়ে গল্পটার মধ্যে কিছু চেঞ্জ করা হচ্ছে। বেসিক গল্প of Kovalan and Kannagi is taken, কিছু Jain ideas, কিছু Buddhist ideas, and কিছু local context where this figure of the woman who is angry becomes a goddess. Right, she becomes a voice who is fighting for dharma. Right, she becomes and there's an elaborate kind of scene in Silapadikaram where she becomes a goddess who stands for dharma, a goddess who stands for justice, a goddess who stands for what is right in society, a goddess who talks about the fact that there should be equality for everyone. In this particular epic, in Silapadikaram, there are two kinds of women basically. One very, very simple kind of women. For instance, Matari bole je character who is a herdsman who looks after the flock, cattle, sheep, and so on. Right. And there is the domestic help. Or there are women like Madhavi, who is a very public figure because she's a courtesan. Right. And then we also have the gods and goddesses in the figure as well. এবং এই যে বিভিন্ন রকমের যে women characters আমরা দেখি in Silapadikaram, এই সব ক্যারেক্টারই কিন্তু আমরা কান্নাগিতেও দেখি, where she moves from an ordinary woman, from a simple housewife to becoming a goddess. Another very important issue with regarding to Silapadikaram is that here, this is an epic which যেখানে justice is a very, very important part of the text. So it here in a very ancient time, in a very early period of Indian history, we have a text which talks about justice. And the mythological aspect of the epic is the idea of justice, which has absolutely been subverted. Justice to ekdomই হলো না, কোভালানকে তো ধরলো আর মেরে ফেললো. He didn't even have a chance to talk. Right. এবং the idea of justice, for instance, you see it figuring very, very importantly in, say, অর্থশাস্ত্র. right? Where Chanakya talks about the Mauryan rule, about the idea of a king. যখন কোনো ক্রাইম হচ্ছে কিভাবে কিং তার সঙ্গে ডিল করবে সেই কথাগুলো কিন্তু অর্থশাস্ত্রে লেখা আছে। এবং the king is a kind of a divine figure, almost the representative of God, right? So it is up to the king to look after the welfare of his people, not kill someone without any proof, right? So the idea of justice, therefore, is a very, very important idea in Silapadikaram. Tachara, as is the case with almost all epics, we get to know about social conditions at that point of time, where monarchy is important, where justice is entirely dependent on the king, এবং কিং কি করবে না করবে সেটা কিং এর ওপর ডিপেন্ড করছে, where society expects that the king will be a good king, where he will be a fair king, যেটা বেঠিক সেটাকে পানিশ করবে, যেটাকে ঠিক, এবং কোনটা ঠিক কোনটা বেঠিক he'll try to find out. Throughout the Jain and the Buddhist tradition, the belief is that the entire universe is governed by dharma. What is right has to be done, and any kind of adharma will result in problems, will result in some kind of big problem, some kind of catastrophe. The big mistake that the Pandyan king does here in Silapadikaram is that when there is a charge brought against Kovalan, he does not examine the facts, jeta sadharon bhabe the court does, right? He does not examine the facts at all. On the other hand, he just blindly punishes this man because he thinks that he has done it, because he's very happy that his wife's anklet has been discovered. So he does not examine the facts. There is no finding out what the real case is. He just kills, orders for the murder, for the execution of Kovalan. এবং এই কারণেই কিন্তু the king also has to pay a price for this action. So anyone who goes against dharma in ancient literature has to face the consequences of going against it. যেটা আমি শুরুতে বলেছিলাম, these two, the entire epic of Silapadikaram and even Manimekalai is set in the two cities of Puhar and Madurai, right? And these two cities, both Puhar and Madurai is destroyed, as we see in Silapadikaram, when Kannagi removes her best and hurls it, curses it. Even the city of Puhar was destroyed, right? Much of the city, much of what remains of Puhar today, Pumpuhar today, is now beneath the sea, right? And Pumpuhar at one point of time was thought to be one of the most prosperous seaports of the early Cholas. And তার রেফারেন্স কিন্তু শিলাপদিকারামেও আছে, মানিমেকালেও আছে, যেখানে কিন্তু এই যে পোর্টের প্রসপেরিটির কথা কিন্তু লেখা আছে পরিষ্কার ভাবে। In Silapadikaram, we also have details of the city of Pumpuhar, যেখানে celebration হচ্ছে ইন্দ্রর একটা festival. So the entire poem gives us a very good idea of Chola, Chera and Pandya economy, where there are several traders, whether we are told that the markets are full of traders not only from local lands but from far across the sea, where silk, grain, cotton, pearls, gems, sandalwood, gold, all of these are traded. এবং কবিতার মধ্যেও কিন্তু ওই লাইনগুলো আছে, where traders would come from distant land, they would come by ship, right? And the poem also goes to talk about the city, how it looks, right? Where you have the king's palace, where you have the suburbs, where there were separate places for the astrologers. প্রত্যেকটি vocationের জন্য আলাদা আলাদা রাস্তা, there were separate streets. So there was one place where the astrologers would stay, there was one place for the farmers, one for the physicians, one for the courtesans, one for musicians, one for dramas, প্রত্যেকটা. And what you find হ্যালো, হ্যাঁ আবার কেটে গেছে। আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে, এলে বলো। আচ্ছা, ওকে ওকে।
Ma'am, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, okay, please resume. I'm really sorry for the
No,
interruption.
I can understand. I can understand. Right. So I don't know when we missed, but I was talking about how the epic presents the details of the world. Right. How it presents to us. We get to know a lot about the city of Pumpuhar. As I was telling, Pumpuhar একটা সময় কিন্তু খুব বড় একটা পোর্ট সিটি ছিল, এবং পরবর্তীকালে কিন্তু এখন যেমন পুম্পুহার মানে মেজর অংশটা কিন্তু সমুদ্রের তলায় চলে গেছে। শিলাপতি কারামে কিন্তু পুম্পুহারের এই পুহার শহরটির ডিটেইল ডিসক্রিপশন আছে, এবং এমন ডিটেইলড আছে যে আমরা বুঝতে পারি যে চোলা, চেরা এবং পান্ডিয়ার সময়টাতে এই শহরটা কিরকম ছিল, where we find out that there were so many traders, merchants who were present here, এবং ট্রেডার্স এবং মার্চেন্ট শুধু লোকাল নয়, বিভিন্ন দূর দূর দেশ থেকে, এবং তারা কি নিয়ে বিজনেস করছে? সিল্ক, গ্রেনস, কটন, স্যান্ডেলউড, পার্লস, জেমস, রাইট? সো এখান থেকে নিয়ে যাচ্ছে, আবার এখানে ফিরে আসছে। And we have within the poem descriptions of how traders came from distant lands, came to buy goods from here, and how they carried, you know, various things from here, how they moved around the city. We also find out শহরটা কিরকম ছিল দেখতে, মানে রাজপ্রাসাদ কোথায় ছিল, সাধারণ লোকের বাড়ি কোথায় ছিল, এবং আমরা জানতে পারি যে বিভিন্ন কাজকর্ম লোকেদের জন্য বিভিন্ন এরিয়া ফিক্স করা ছিল, মানে দেয়ার ওয়াজ আ সেপারেট স্ট্রিট ফর আ ফার্মার, আ সেপারেট প্লেস ফর আ ডান্সার, ফর দ্য কোর্টিজান, ফর দ্য মিউজিশিয়ান, ফর দ্য ড্রামা, প্রত্যেকের আলাদা আলাদা এরিয়া অ্যালোকেটেড ছিল, মানে দেয়ার ওয়াজ আ উইভার্স কোয়ার্টার, দেয়ার ওয়াজ আ গোল্ডস্মিথস কোয়ার্টার অ্যান্ড সো অন। এবং the image of the city, যে শহরের যে আমরা পিকচারটা পাই, সেটা হচ্ছে যে a very very prosperous city, যেখানে ধান, দুধ, everything was flowing. It was such a very very prosperous city in those days. So it gives us, this poem gives us a very detailed description. It tells us about the big houses, কত বড় বড় tall mansions, ব্রাহ্মণদের বাড়ি কোথায় ছিল, যাদের প্রচুর জমি ছিল তাদের বাড়িগুলো কোথায় ছিল। So it gives us a vivid idea of the way of life of the people, right? So the the epic therefore provides us with a very very good idea of the kind of world that was existent at that point of time. মানে ancient সময়, ওই সময় কিরকম ছিল পুরো সেটআপ, সোসাইটি কিরকম ছিল, শহরগুলো কিরকম ছিল, ট্রেড এন্ড কমার্স কিরকম ছিল, প্রত্যেকটা কিন্তু আমরা ক্লিয়ারলি এখানে দেখতে পাই এই শিলাপদিকারামে। এবং শিলাপদিকারামের যেটা বললাম, গোড়াতে শুরু হচ্ছে কিন্তু কান্নাগি এবং কোভালানের বিয়ে, শুরু হচ্ছে কিন্তু হ্যাপিনেস, রাইট? অ্যান্ড তারা কিন্তু অর্ডিনারি পিপল, একদম সাধারণ মানুষ, কিন্তু অ্যাট দি এন্ড অফ দ্য স্টোরি, যেটা আমি আগেও বললাম, কান্নাগি বিকামস আ কাইন্ড অফ আ গড, রাইট? আ কাইন্ড অফ আ গড অ্যাট দি এন্ড. Apart from the ordinary characters that we find in Silapadikaram, there are also a few divine characters. We do find gods, Indro Jamon makes an appearance in the story, right? There is a reference to Lord Shiva in the prologue, right? Kannagir past gulo amader bola hoy ebong bibhinno shomoy kintu ঠাকুর দেবতাকে আমরা দেখতে পাই in the plot of the poem. The appearance of Lord Shiva announces the change of Kannagi from an ordinary woman into an immortal goddess. Right. At one point of time in the story, Kannagi is compared to goddess Kali, in her fury, in her vengeance. And this transformation of Kannagi from a human to a divine is wonderfully displayed through the use, jeta ami gorate bolechi, the use of Akam and Puram poetry, where you have the poet referring to the feelings as well as where he's describing about what is happening in the outside world. Right. So this is something that you see throughout happening in the poem. The entire poem, Silapadikaram, is divided into 3 broad divisions called the kantams. And each of these kantams are further divided into what is called a katai. The 3 kantams are named, if you have a copy of the text, you can see the 3 kantams are named after the 3 important early Tamil kingdoms. The capitals, the names of the capitals. For instance, the first is the Puhar Kandam, right? A Kandam or Kantam as you might be, and Puhar is that place, right? Puhar Kandam is based in Puhai, the Chola capital, the place where the river Kaveri meets the Bay of Bengal, right? This is the first section, the first Kandam. And here we have Kannagi and Kovalan getting married, beginning their life. This is also where Kovalan leaves his wife and lives with the prostitute Madhavi, right? The second Kandam is the Madurai Kandam, and as the very title suggests, this of course is set in the city of Madurai, the capital of the Pandya kings at this point of time. It is here that Kovalam and Kannagi come to begin a new life, where they are trying to rebuild their life. And this book ends with Kannagi becoming a goddess, where she transformed from an ordinary human being into a goddess. The third Kandam, Banci Kandam, is based in the Chera country's capital, Kanchi, the Kanchi Kandam. And here, the story begins after Kannagi has gone into the sky. And here, the story talks about the stories of, the epic talks about the stories of the Chera king, of the queen, of the army, how they build a temple for her, how they built, they sculpt an idol for her, and how she is worshipped as a goddess. The significance of this epic Silapadikaram lies in the fact that it combines various elements, various beliefs from the Jain, from the Buddhist, and from the Hindu religious text as well, Hindu religious traditions as well, because we see Kali reference to Shiva, to Indra, and so on. Like many traditional epics, it is an epic which talks of love, rejection, good and evil. However, this epic talks about ordinary people. Kovalam and Kannagi are not kings. So here we are not predominantly talking, the central figures, the protagonists are not kings and queens. We're not talking about their adventures. On the other hand, the central protagonist of this epic are very ordinary people. Ordinary people whose daily lives are very simple, but who ultimately get caught up in important issues of justice, of injustice, actually, of trouble that comes across them. Silapadikaram is one of those texts which have been a very important part of Tamil literature and Tamil folklore and culture, actually. Right. And several, there have been rewritings, there have been attempts to rewrite the story or present the story of the Silapadikaram to modern, you know, uh, audiences, rewriting it to suit the modern taste as well. And there is this story where there is a work, it's called The Prince, I think, where the Silapadikaram, the story of the Silapadikaram is again rewritten, right, keeping in mind a modern readership. So it is a work which talks about chastity. It is a work where the idea of chastity is something very, very important, where Kannagi becomes the idea of the emblem of chastity. And as I told you right at the beginning, this is one of those works, as with all ancient works, which passed down through oral traditions. And Kannagi is someone who stands out as the central character. She is someone who becomes, a goddess at the end. And she's described as the ideal kind of a wife. And, if you look at the work, then you could also question Kannagi's actions, because here is someone who is left by her husband, and then he comes back again. And she surprisingly forgives him. And she's angry. She has been angry throughout. And the reason why the poem is called Silapadikaram is because of this anklet, which is a very auspicious symbol of their marriage as well. And the anklet actually changes the course of the story, because it is when they come to Maturai, when he tries to sell off the anklet, that the rest of the story progresses and leads Kannagi to become a goddess ultimately, where she, boards Indra's chariot. She's reunited with her husband and ultimately becomes a goddess who is worshipped by all the kings near and far. So we don't know what happens to Madhavi, the courtesan, excepting the fact that Madhavi gives birth to a daughter. But otherwise, there's no other information about Madhavi that we find out. And Kannagi, when she removes her breast, she's almost, when she tears apart her left breast, she's almost kind of, removing a token of femininity from her. And she's all the more fearsome when this happens. It's almost as if she becomes like the Kali figure, an avenging kind of a figure. And it is because of her anger, and it is because of her vengeance, her wanting to take revenge, that she becomes this figure, a symbolic figure of this woman. So who becomes from an ordinary, very ordinary kind of woman, who becomes a symbolic representation of a heroic woman character, who is able to confront the king over the miscarriage of justice that has happened. So Silapadikaram is a story which talks about the transformation of a woman character. And this is something which is very, very, I think this is something that is remarkable about this particular epic, because we don't usually see this with reference to women characters. Most of the epics actually talk about male characters. We don't have very many where the woman character is so very important, right, where she becomes an embodiment of virtue, an embodiment of chastity, someone who takes things into her hand and decides to become and she becomes a goddess who is worshipped by everyone. So this is something which is very, very unique about Silapadikaram, I feel, where the woman has this agency in spite of the fact that initially she seems to be someone who is very docile, very quiet, very forgiving. But when it comes to questioning injustice, when it comes to raising her voice against what the wrong that has been done, you almost see her assuming a very different kind of a figure. So I think in that sense, this is a very, very interesting kind of a story and a kind of a woman who is very different from what she was when the poem begins. And this transformation that we see of Kannagi from not only a human to a divine being, but a woman who decides to stand up against what she vehemently believes as injustice and something that's wrong. I'll stop here, and in case you have questions, I could take it up.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I hope you are well. I think it's a literally fine blend of explanation, but I have a question. Why Kannagi is called chaste woman? This is my question.
Yeah, she's referred to as a chaste woman because she remains true to Kovalan in spite of the fact that Kovalan leaves her and uh, goes off to live with Madhavi. Right. She remains true. She remains loyal to her husband. And she, even when he decides to come back to her, she, she agrees to that. So she remains true to her husband. Right. Just because her husband has gone off with another woman, she doesn't do that. She remains the way she was. She remains the dutiful wife to Kovalan. And of course, one could question that how come she takes him back when he comes back, when he is being so unfair towards her. But that is how she is. But what is interesting is that later on, this very seemingly docile woman, docile meaning very quiet, right? Sadharan, very ordinary woman. Suddenly, when when the time comes when she finds out that what has been done is wrong, how she stands up. I think that change is something which is very interesting to note. এবং সে কারণেই হয়তো প্রথমে তাকে অনেক কোয়াইট, তাকে অনেক ডসাইল, তাকে অনেক চেস্ট দেখানো হয়েছিল টু শো দিস চেঞ্জ দ্যাট হ্যাপেন্স। মানে কেউ তো কথাই করেনি প্র্যাকটিক্যালি যেভাবে সে way she goes crying into the Pandian, she's not just crying, but she's angry, absolutely waiting for revenge. এবং ওই চেঞ্জটা বোধহয় খুব ভালো দেখায় when you compare with earlier Kannagi that you see and the later Kannagi. উত্তর দিতে পেরেছি, বোঝাতে পেরেছি?
অবশ্যই ম্যাম, একদম ক্লিয়ার হয়ে গেছে। এই ওয়ার্ডটা গত 3 দিন ধরে বেশ কনফিউজড করছিল, কিন্তু এখন বুঝতে পেরেছি।
চেস মানে বেসিক্যালি শি ইজ পিওর, মানে ওর হাজবেন্ড অন্য কারোর সঙ্গে থাকছে বলে সে অন্য কারোর সঙ্গে তা না, শি রিমেইনস Kannagi the wife of Kovalan.
ওকে ম্যাম, আমি বুঝতে পেরেছি এবার, বেশ ভালো লেগেছে। আর আমাদের ক্লাস থেকে এমনি কোনো প্রশ্ন নেই, যা যা কোশ্চেন ছিল প্রায় আপনি সবকটাই বুঝিয়ে দিয়েছেন আমাদের। এই একটা পার্টিকুলার ওয়ার্ড যেটা আমাকে সিন্স 3 ডেজ থেকে অনেক কনফিউজ করছিল, আর এখনো আপনি বলেছিলেন সেটা যে কেন বলা হচ্ছে, কিন্তু তবুও একটু অসুবিধা ছিল, যেটা এখন ক্লিয়ার হয়ে গেল। আর এমনি কোনো কোশ্চেন নাই।
Thank you. So is Devaditya around?
আমরা ডাকছি স্যার
আচ্ছা,
আমি দেখে দিচ্ছি
এটা কি তোমাদের 4th সেমিস্টারের টেক্সট?
ইয়েস ম্যাম এটা আমাদের 4th সেমিস্টারের
আচ্ছা, তোমাদের কি ওই মৃচ্ছকাটিকা এগুলো কিছু আছে? কালিদাস?
হ্যাঁ মৃচ্ছকাটিকা রয়েছে, অভিজ্ঞান শকুন্তলা এগুলো রয়েছে আমাদের, মহাভারত।
আচ্ছা আচ্ছা,
আমার মনে হয় এই টেক্সটে এটা দ্য বুক অফ বাঞ্চি একটা ভীষণই একটা ক্রিটিক্যাল স্টোরি, যেটা আজকে বুঝতে পেরে বেশ ভালো লাগলো। আমার নামগুলো কোনো মতে মনে থাকছিল না, কিছু কিছু এখন মনে হয়েছে, কান্নাকি, কোয়ালান, এগুলো কিছু কিছু ওয়ার্ড আমার মনেই থাকছিল না।
হ্যাঁ, আর কান্নাকি দেখবে কিছু কিছু জায়গায় কান্নাকি বলেও লেখা আছে, KI ও লেখা আছে, কিছু কিছু GI, তো বোথ আর অল রাইট, কারণ তামিল অ্যালফাবেট গুলো একটু আলাদা।
Okay. I am sorry that I could not attend the entire lecture. I know ma'am can understand.
I know. We are all in the same boat.
Yes. Okay. So students, any further questions? Okay. So I will close the lecture with a formal note of thanks. I really thank Dr. Nishi Pulugurtha, my respected madam. And as I mentioned before, she has been my teacher, and I will definitely be revisiting this lecture. It's good that we can record this, and we will be putting this up on our official YouTube. And from what I could manage to gather during my journeys across the room and across the college, the lecture really touched upon the salient features of the text, and the way she introduced the text, I think it will be immensely helpful for our students. And I must say that after today's discussion, probably the book of Banci, which has, I remember teaching this two different batches before this, all of them had complained that this particular text seemed very alien and they couldn't actually relate with the cultural difference. But I think the way ma'am has introduced the text, highlighting its relevance for our society, it will be very beneficial for our students. Thank you, ma'am. We will be reviewing your lecture again. And I will also request to you, if possible, to share the PPT with us.
Okay.
Our students will find it very useful. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I will mail the PPT to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Acha.